Takeaways from last night's relatively civilized vice presidential debate, the latest on the president's recovery, and SNL tells this weekend's musical guest not to show up. Here's what you need to know. Good morning, this is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Thursday, October 8th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Good morning, Carlo. A late night, an early morning. How you doing?
Oh, man. It's brutal. These debate nights are so brutal. I'm so beat. But good to see you. I'm doing well. How you doing?
I'm okay. Let's get to it. The first and only vice presidential debate was last night. It will probably be remembered, if anything, for being relatively civil and a policy-heavy discussion. It did get heated at times. The debate, though, was largely focused on the White House's pandemic response. Both Kamala Harris and Mike Pence got into it on other issues like the Supreme Court vacancy, healthcare, China, and climate change.
Yeah, so I pulled the short straw and stayed up for the whole thing, Jill, so you could get some much-needed rest. So thank you for that.
I was up for some of it, though. I caught up on it this morning.
I know. It's honestly, nobody will remember this tomorrow, which is how these vice presidential debates typically go. I have to say, though, it was nice to be able to hear what the candidates were saying. It sort of felt like a throwback, politicians sort of politely ignoring the moderator's questions and then answering the questions that they wanted to be asked. But just given how insane that first one was, this was like a little bit of a throwback. So again, I don't think there was much. I don't think it changes anything. I don't think any votes were gained or lost on either side. A couple notes that I took last night just while watching this. The Democrats are still playing defense on climate, and I don't get it at all. It's they're terrified of losing votes on environmental issues, specifically on fracking, which I understand because it's specifically tied to votes that they need in Western Pennsylvania. But it's still surprising to me that they don't do a better job talking about climate in terms of this is an issue that, the moderator asked Mike Pence if he thought climate change was an existential threat. He didn't even answer it. Kamala Harris should have said right there, of course it's an existential threat. Everybody in this country knows it. If you don't know that by now, you don't deserve to be elected. So that's just one thought. I thought that Harris was good, but she could have been more outraged, I think, on issues related to the pandemic. When Mike Pence said that he thought that the White House COVID response had been a success, she should have got up and pointed to the fact that they are literally debating through plexiglass 8 months into this thing. It's so obviously not a success. She herself taking personal health risks to even be there because of how badly they failed, and the fact that we still don't even know when the president himself tested positive for the virus. I thought Mike Pence was effective. He's very good at taking questions and then sort of answering a completely different question, like most politicians are, but he is like first ballot Hall of Fame when it comes to sort of like bulldozing his way through a question. Harris did that plenty too, but he did it the most. Again, I think the Democrats are squandering the Supreme Court fight. I think they're not even trying to sort of put up a fight on it. I don't think Harris even mentioned the sort of like rank hypocrisy of the Republicans pushing through a nominee this late in the game after what happened in 2016, which is surprising to me because that's a winning message for them. They're sort of underappreciating, I think, the fury in their own base on that issue. But yeah, just some errant takeaways. But again, I don't think there was much to be gained or lost.
Susan Page, who was the moderator, she asked some really good questions, but she's actually getting a lot of heat today because she didn't hold them down in terms of asking, in terms of them answering the questions, and both candidates, right? You just didn't. There were very specific questions that were asked. Mike Pence, she asked about Roe v. Wade, and he just totally dodged it. There's a lot of. There were a lot of questions that were just left unanswered. It's almost like these debates need a moderator, and then they need like someone to kind of like crack the whip a little bit, who could just be like, answer, you didn't answer the question. Right. What's the, because it feels like we want answers to this stuff. Like, do you believe in climate change? Do you think it's an existential threat? That's what we want to know. And I think it is just this insight about the Democrats kind of playing defense on the environment is a little bit bizarre, especially given the fact that we have this record hurricane season, this record fire season.
Right.
It's the Green New Deal that's throwing them off, because the Green New Deal is just seemed as for moderates, like maybe just too extreme in terms of what it might do to the economy. So for some reason, I think that's why they're playing defense on it.
The Republicans are very good at turning the Green New Deal into like the policy of the Biden administration, what a Biden administration would do. Although the Green New Deal, by the way, isn't even really a policy. It's like this framework that they came up with, that House Democrats came up with. But yeah, I mean, Mike Pence yesterday, he was like, I think he said something about hurricanes. He's like, we haven't had, we have the same amount of hurricanes that we had 100 years ago. I mean, she should have said, hello, we're on Delta here, people. Like, come on.
I mean, that's the problem with these debates, when there's no one fact checking. I mean, Pence also in the beginning was talking about record testing. I mean, that was a missed opportunity for COVID. That was a missed opportunity for Kamala Harris to come out and say, what are you talking about? Per capita, we are not doing enough testing. People still can't get tests, and it's taking weeks to get the results. So, they just spun their narrative as usual. But it was nice for it to be a tad more civil. Meanwhile, President Trump continuing to recover at the White House. In a new video posted from outside of the Oval Office, he says says getting infected with the coronavirus was a, quote, blessing from God. He credited a therapeutic antibody cocktail from Regeneron for his recovery, and said he would make it available for free to anyone who needs it. That drug is still in trials, but shortly after the video posted, Regeneron announced that it would seek emergency FDA approval.
Yeah, this is one of these antibody cocktails that is showing itself to be one of the most promising treatments. Although we should, of course, mention it is still in trials. The president doesn't have the ability to make it available for free to anybody who needs it, and we don't even know if that is if we can credit that with his recovery. Frankly, we don't even know if he's recovered yet, right? Like, he's only been sick for, we don't even know how long he's been sick. Oh, my Lord. Meanwhile, the White House outbreak has now infected at least 34 people. That's according to an internal FEMA memo that was obtained by ABC News last night. Trump, as you said, back in the Oval Office, potentially just like shedding the virus to God knows who. I did want to mention something else, Jill. The New England Journal of Medicine yesterday, which is widely considered to be like the most prestigious medical journal in the country, probably in the world, they came out in an unprecedented editorial, the first one they've ever done on politics, to say that the Trump administration's failures on COVID just so egregious that they all need to be voted out of office. They didn't exactly endorse Joe Biden, though they kind of did just by virtue of saying that. But this was their first sort of endorsement in 208 years. I don't think it'll change votes, but it's notable when these things happen, and we should mention them. Meanwhile, on the topic of endorsements, Taylor Swift coming out for Joe Biden yesterday. That's her first presidential endorsement, and frankly, it probably is more impactful than anything that comes out of the New England Journal of Medicine.
But no, both of those equally. The New England Journal of Medicine, that is huge, because that's not a political organization.
Yeah, exactly. No, these are doctors and medical professionals. They don't want any part of politics. But and this happened with Scientific American last month too. They came out and said Trump has to go. So when you see these sorts of publications come out, like, that is meaningful. I didn't mean to cut you off, Jill.
No. Taylor Swift's endorsement also pretty big. The question is whether these endorsements, especially and just all of the encouraging of people to vote and register, if that's going to translate into actual votes. Are people going to register, and if they register, are they going to vote? I was talking about on the podcast last week my struggles with registering to vote. I did mention that, right?
Yeah.
Carlo. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I moved, so I had to change my address officially with the DMV, which is fine. And then I tried to register to vote, but I still have not received any sort of confirmation. I don't know where I'm voting. I still have to follow up on this. Like, if I'm going through it, I'm sure others are. It's not so easy. On the note of COVID, though, there is this growing sense among infectious disease experts that the U.S. and Europe are now in the opening stages of this much-feared fall-winter wave of the pandemic. Paris shut down bars, but city hospitals are warning that they are seeing this influx of new patients. The EU noting that infections are starting to rise among older people across the continent. Here in the U.S., Boston delaying the reopening of public schools after the city's positivity rate rose above 4%. A field hospital has now been activated in Milwaukee. So
It's not looking
these are
good.
not good signs.
No, here in New York City, the mayor debuted this sort of heat map yesterday of the areas in the city where infections are rising, announcing closures of non-essential businesses in some zip codes, and warning of, quote, tough days ahead. He was, I don't know if you saw that yesterday, but Bill de Blasio, he was looking not good in the sense of just like sort of just not good about where we're headed. This, of course, is the Orthodox Jewish community in some of these Queens and Brooklyn neighborhoods have been out in the streets protesting, saying they've been unfairly targeted by the city in these closures. Dr. Fauci, meanwhile, he's sort of, by the way, calling this kind of a continuation of the first wave. For whatever that's worth, he's been out there warning that deaths could hit 400,000 if we, quote, don't do what we need to do in the coming months. And I don't know if you've watched any of Fauci's media hits this week. He is looking exasperated. Like he's just looking over this.
The problem is like, you know, and I'm working on a story for Cheddar.com about what we talked about last week about just the toll this is taking on working women. And I was talking to a career coach, and she was saying, you know, part of the problem is that we were in emergency mode for however many months. And we're still kind of in it, but you can't really stay in emergency mode for that long.
Exactly.
Right? Like this heightened awareness, there's just so much that we can take.
Yeah.
And
I'm starting to notice the mask fatigue, even out here where the mask compliance is basically 100%. You're starting to notice it.
And so this is something I wanted to mention. So we often talk about the president's response to COVID in political terms. But I do want to talk about how his words affect actual Americans. A friend of mine lost her father to COVID back in March, early April, which really early on in the pandemic. And she posted something on social media in response to the president's recent rhetoric about the virus. So I asked her if I could read this on the podcast because I wanted to share it with everybody. And she said yes. So I'm going to try to get through this without crying. So she wrote, by the time that he was admitted to the hospital, the doctors called to tell us that he was very sick. My last conversation with him was over FaceTime. He was wearing an oxygen mask and could barely talk. The call lasted only a couple of minutes. A few days later, my family was telling him how much we loved him over a conference call before he was going to be intubated. We could barely hear him over oxygen that he was getting, but he told us no regrets. He died 3 days later, and we had a Zoom ceremony to commemorate a man who was larger than life. Since April 1st, when my dad passed, COVID-19 has dominated my life. I am terrified of catching it, afraid that maybe if I did, there was something genetic that would cause me also to have a severe case. And as a single mom, I am petrified of that thought. I'm heartbroken that Ashy, who's her son, won't have one of his biggest fans by his side as he grows up. I am devastated that I didn't get the opportunity to have a proper goodbye and that my family has not been able to have a proper funeral. The words of Donald Trump today have sickened me. How dare he tell us not to be afraid of a contagious disease that has robbed over 211,000 families of their loved ones. His words could not have been more disrespectful, insensitive, and infuriating. So I reached out to her to ask her if I could share this and just to check in on her and see how she's doing. And she said, you know, obviously it's a very difficult time, but he said that Trump's words really brought her back to like 6 months ago. So, you know, words matter. We forget.
Look, I think
sorry, go on.
No. Go ahead, Joel.
No, it's just we forget sometimes, if this hasn't touched you personally, that there are 211,000 families who are still in mourning. There are people who are still sick with this disease. There are people who are having long-term effects of it and still dealing with these long haulers that are still dealing with it. This is real. We're in the middle of it. You know, to be downplaying it is just not right. I mean, regardless of politics, it's just like Where's
It is,
the
but it is.
empathy?
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned this and read this because it's very powerful, and I think it's very helpful to hear these things, especially if you don't have somebody in your life who died. I mean, I'm lucky enough to I know people who have passed, but nobody in my immediate circle has, thankfully. And this is, by the way, this is how Trump. This is why Trump loses the election. I will take this to my, I will just continue to say that his response, and particularly coming out and saying, hey, no big deal. Like, you got to live with it. It's so disrespectful to people like this, and I think that's why he loses.
All right, we're going to take a hard turn here and talk about a little bit of technology news. Facebook saying it's going to remove all political and social issue ads as soon as polls close on November 3rd. Its latest effort to get ahead of the possibility that a candidate would use the platform to declare victory before the results have been called by news organizations or otherwise try to just manipulate the outcome. So Facebook telling advertisers that they should expect the ban to last at least a week.
Yeah, so this is a big step that they took yesterday. But the problem with this is it's not the ads really that are the problem. It's the problem is, let's just be real, right? The problem is that the possibility that one of the candidates, Donald Trump, writes to his 30 million Facebook followers that he won the election before the votes are counted, and then what happens? There's still no plan for that, and I don't know what Facebook is doing to keep that from happening. They can't really do anything. He's free to use the platform, I guess, how he sees fit. But as Kevin Roose, who is the New York Times technology columnist, wrote on Twitter last night, I'm just going to read it because I thought it was very sort of clever. If you have to shut down your ad platform because you're worried that it might destabilize democracy, maybe the company that you run is too big. Just leave it at
that. Very well said. Meanwhile, as the Bears and the Bucks prep for Thursday Night Football, the NFL once again scrambling to deal with fallout of new positive COVID-19 tests. Patriots cornerback Stephon Gilmore has tested positive. Two more members of the Tennessee Titans as well have. Sunday's Bills-Titans game is now in jeopardy, as the Pats-Broncos game, if more tests come up positive in New England.
The fact that the NFL, Jill, didn't build into the schedule more than one bye week, I think, is going to come back to really haunt them. Because this was obviously going to happen if they didn't do a bubble protocol, right? Meanwhile, on the same topic of the NFL, the Miami Dolphins have been given the go-ahead by the Florida governor. I can't even with this. The Miami Dolphins have been given the go-ahead by the Florida governor to have a capacity crowd at their games going forward. 65,000 people in the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, though the team says that they're going to stick with keeping attendance to 13,000. I just wanted to mention this because 2020 is so upside down that you've got the NFL owners making better public health calls than actual elected officials.
So basically, if they wanted to put 65,000 fans in the stands, they would have been allowed to.
The governor DeSantis said, "Do it, go for it." It's crazy.
And finally, country music singer Morgan Wallen was supposed to be the musical guest on SNL this weekend, but the show actually had to rescind his invite because he broke COVID protocols. He was seen in TikTok videos partying without a mask and kissing multiple women while hanging out at the University of Alabama last weekend. He has apologized to his fans, saying that he takes full responsibility for his actions.
I don't actually know who this guy is, but apparently he's an up and coming country music star. What an idiot. I'm sorry, but this is the biggest gig of your career, dude. And all you have to do is not actively try to get coronavirus. So yeah, but his apology, I think at least he is taking responsibility for just being dumb. And no new musical guest has been announced, so I guess we'll see what they come up with. Hopefully somebody good.
Who do they get? I'm trying to think who they would get on a short notice. I feel like they'll pull in maybe
what's a
Bruce Springsteen. I know that he'd be
a Bruce is
get,
a good idea.
But I feel like he's someone, he's local. I feel like he's always
good idea.
He's sort of evergreen.
I like that idea. Bring on Bruce. Right. When in doubt, bring on Bruce.
Totally. That's who I'm pushing for. Okay, that's what you need to know, everybody, for Thursday, October 8th. And just one quick note. Thank you guys for indulging me in reading that post that my friend wrote on social media. I do think that it spoke to me, and I always think about her and her dad, and just the personal toll this has taken for so many people. And if you don't really have that in your life, I think it helps to personalize this a little bit.
I agree. I totally agree.
All right, everyone, that's what you need to know again for Thursday, October 8th.
All right, guys, bye.